everyone. Looks like it's just me and Michael right now. I'm gonna get my opening statement and then send a quick text to everyone. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Madam Chair, how are you doing?
Good, good.
Good morning.
Morning. How are you doing, Nida?
I am doing well, thank you.
Good, good. Hi, Chantal.
Good morning, everybody.
So Lydia, do you want to start it and kick off? How do you want to do this? Yep,
Yeah, I was gonna start it and then turn it over to you at 12.
10-4. I am here.
Thank you. Quick text to colleagues and we'll get started. I don't know. Everyone's still in vacation mode, maybe. All right, well, I sent out a text and looks like y'all can hear me and see me. All right, well, we'll go ahead and just get the opening statements over with and where's everybody? All right, good morning, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It's Tuesday, April 20th, 2021. We're here today for virtual hearing on docket 0452, message and order changing the date of the preliminary election for this municipal year from September 21st, 2021 to September 14th, 2021. This matter is sponsored by former Mayor Martin J. Walsh and was referred to the committee on March 24th, 2021. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12th executive order, we're modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and allowing us to have this hearing on Zoom, while at the same time allowing us, in order to balance the public safety and needs of the moment. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and on Xfinity 8, RCNA2, Verizon 964. This will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made a part of the record and available to all councilors. If you would like to offer public comments and have not signed up to do so, please email christine.o'donnell@boston.gov. Quick description, as indicated by the title, docket 0452 is a home rule petition. Oh, I'm sorry, is it a home rule petition? I think that may be. No, it's a petition that would move the date of the preliminary election to September 14th, the 7th Tuesday preceding the general election. In the transmittal letter, former mayor indicated that because of the expansion of vote by mail to include fall elections, timeframe for certifying election results, and the election department's requirement to hold a ballot position drawing, the original date of September 21st would create a challenge for the printing and distribution of vote by mail ballots. Former Mayor Walsh stated that it would be prudent to move the date of the preliminary election to September 14th because of these reasons. Docket 0452 is again, I'm gonna check again. I'm sorry if it's a home rule petition. I thought it was not.
Madam Chair, it is not.
It is not a home rule petition. These are my notes, my apologies. This is just the election department and their former Mayor Walsh is asking that we move this. So as a result, in order to follow legal statutory procedure, we're going to hear from the election department and then make sure that we are able to move or at least see the reasons why we need to move this up a week, if it actually does make a difference in terms of the turnaround of the ballots. just to be clear, the city does have the authority to change the date of the preliminary election under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 54, Section 103P. So participating today on behalf of the administration's behalf are Commissioner Inaida Tabares of Boston Election Department. I believe Sabino Piemonte is also participating, and also joining the conversation is Patrick Roth, who is a advocate for safe ballot collection, or excuse me, safe signature collection, looking at ways in which we can, as a city, collect signatures for the many people who are running for office. That's going to be part of this conversation as well. So I'm just now turning on to see the calendar to see who has joined us, just to make sure I'm clear. And I know we've been joined by Councillor Michael Flaherty, also Councillor Bach, and let's see, and Councillor Andrea Campbell. So right now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues for some brief opening remarks, and then we're going to get down to business. Thank you. In order of arrival, that'd be Michael Flaherty, Councillor Bach, and then Councillor Andrea Campbell. Councillor Arroyo has also joined us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, the city's charter requires that the preliminary election occur on the sixth Tuesday preceding the general election. So in order to follow the legal statutory procedure, the city must proceed under the home rule petition process in order to adopt that change. So the city does have the authority to change the date of the preliminary election under Mass General Laws, Chapter 54, Section 103P. That said, for me, just in my opening, it's just that, why do we need to do this? And what would happen if we didn't move the date? And as a father of four, I often say, don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today. So I would really be looking to hear forward from the election department as to what that additional week would mean in terms of their efforts preparing us for the general election. So is it something we can do in the current existing timeframe, or is this additional week necessary to accomplish that task? So that's it for me, and look forward to hearing the testimony. Appreciate it, Madam Chair.
Councillor Bach?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just say, I think that if we move the election date of the prelim up a week earlier, I do think that because of the way that Boston runs on a kind of scholastic calendar, because of how many universities and the way that all of our leases run 9/1 and everything, it's certainly been my experience throughout my life as a volunteer and then a candidate in political life in Boston, that there is a kind of intensity of focus on our local city elections that comes only after Labor Day. And the disadvantage to me of moving the preliminary a week earlier would be that instead of having 2 weeks after Labor Day, you would have only one. And I do worry that, and of course with the pandemic, I think that our in-person engagement with voters is likely to get more and more substantive with each passing week of this cycle. Just as, more people get vaccinated, folks feel safer, incidence hopefully goes down, all of that. So because of that, I think I start kind of similar to Councillor Flaherty in a default position of well, why move it? Because I do think there's an advantage to having it that week later in September for voters to have the chance to really meet and engage with all the candidates. At the same time, I think we all know our elections department does amazing work. They've done incredible work in this pandemic. We want them to be able to be successful. We want them to be able to be successful in the context of expanded, no excuse absentee voting and mail-in voting. And so I'm really looking similarly to hear from them about the logistics of what's necessary here. And I'll also just echo Councillor Flaherty that I had originally thought, wait, why is it that we could do this without a home rule petition? And then similarly had found that there is this state law that gives us specifically the right to change the date without doing a charter amendment. Whereas for other aspects of our procedure, and I know that you referenced some advocacy on that front, other things in our charter about how signatures are gathered and stuff would involve a home rule petition, but I understand that this would not. So thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Here to listen. No open remarks. Thanks.
Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry for my throat's being a little, I'm sick, so I'm dealing with that. So I'll limit my words here. I this is something that we've been working on as an office for the last couple months with the Secretary of State's office in conversation with Mr. Piemonte in terms of how we make these elections the most accessible possible, especially considering the pandemic. And there'll be some home rule petitions coming from my office this week that we're filing and we're finalizing. We've been working with several offices in terms of the Secretary of State and the Elections Department on these. The one part that has been tricky for me on this is actually the changing of the election date. The reason why this has come up, and I've spoken to the Elections Department, I've spoken to the Secretary of State, is so that we can accommodate mail-in voting. However, to my knowledge, Boston is not currently able to mail-in vote on this actual election. And so this would pave the way, I guess, to the ability for us to do mail-in voting, but it doesn't guarantee we have mail-in voting if an HRP for mail-in voting or the state legislature doesn't adjust that date, is my understanding. And so my hope is that we see that happen. And one of the things that I suggested, and I'm sure Mr. Piemonte, who is on this call, will attest, is I've debated if we, for the same reasons that Councillor Bach rose, in terms of people having access to vote, I've never been a fan of giving them less time. I've always been a fan of giving them more time. There's nothing, I know that it's a traditional thing, but there's nothing that says if we're going to move the election date, we can't move the general back a week to accommodate the same time frame rather than moving the primary up a week. It's something I've struggled with in terms of what makes the most sense to accommodate this. And so I'm happy to hear conversation as to why this specific decision and why we believe this is the best way to accommodate that time frame for mail-in voting, because this is the one aspect of the election package essentially that'll be coming this week, or that'll be filed this week, that I think is still up in the air for me in terms of why move it up a week rather than back a week. But I'm open to hearing from the Elections Department and trusting their judgment on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I think that is it from our counselors in terms of opening remarks. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Oh, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Flynn, we just had some very brief opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edwards, I just got on this meeting now, so I'm going to withhold my comments. Thank you, Councillor Edwards, and to the administration team that's here. Thank you.
Thank you. So we also are joined here today by, as I mentioned, the administration, and also Patrick Roth, who is an advocate for safe election processes in this pandemic, and also has been working on and helped support the resolution that we supported last time for a safer form of signature gathering. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to, I see we've been joined by Councillor Julia Mejia. I'm going to now turn it over to Anita Tavares from the city to talk about the city's position, and then Patrick can go, and then we'll go to questions. As just a quick house cleaning note, I am going to, due to a previously scheduled personal appointment, I'm going to turn this hearing over to Councillor Flaherty at 12 o'clock. So, Anita.
Good morning, Councillor Edwards and committee members. Thank you for holding this session today. My name is Anita Tavares. I'm the chair of the Board of Election Commissioners. We are here today to discuss the possibility of changing the date of this year's preliminary municipal election from Tuesday, September 21st, 2021 to Tuesday, September 14th, September 2021. Last month, the legislature voted to expand vote by mail through June 31st, 2021. Should vote by mail be further expanded to include the fall elections, the department will be faced with a very tight turnaround between September and November for the printing and distribution of any vote by mail ballots requested by voters. Ballots for the November election cannot be printed until the certification of the preliminary municipal election results has taken place, and that date would be September 27th, provided that there are no petitions for a recount filed. And then that date would be followed by a ballot position drawing, which can take place as early as September 28th. And it's only after the September 28th date, can we then send the names to our printer for creation of the ballots, and then the ballots have to then be proofread before we can even receive them in the office, with an approximate turnaround time of October 7th through October 12th for us to receive the actual ballots from our vendor. That leaves us with about 3 weeks to mail ballots to voters and for them to get it back to the election department in enough time to be counted for the general election. And the reason why we did decide to go with the September date is I don't think there's anything that allows us to move the date of the election from November 2nd. I believe the law states that we have to hold the general election on the first Tuesday in November. But we are allowed under section 54, 103P to move the date of the preliminary election. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. We've also been joined by Councillor O'Malley. So I'm going to just quickly turn it over to Patrick, if you have some brief opening remarks. And then we're going to go through, again, Patrick is here just discussing safe signature gathering. This is, I want to be clear, I did tell the elections department that he would, Patrick would be here. This is not an opposition. This is just literally to make sure that we're having a conversation about this as well. We figured that the two could happen at the same time. So Patrick.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Edwards. Thanks to the full council for having me on briefly. I'll just briefly introduce myself and the subject. I know we talked about it at the council hearing last week. As Councillor Edwards mentioned, I'm Patrick Roth. I'm an attorney. I live in Ward 19. I have been working on the signature issue leading back to last year, sort of an extension of some voting rights advocacy work I've been doing for some time. This year, last year, of course, we had some relief on the in-person signatures issue as a result of a court ruling. That relief expired at the end of the year, sort of by virtue of the Supreme Judicial Court's order. So right now, there's really no relief from the ordinary statutory standards that candidates need to access the ballot across the state. It's particularly acute given the pandemic and in Boston, given the high numbers of signatures that candidates need to get. So that's, as everyone knows, it's 3,000 in-person signatures, and the statute says in person to be on the ballot as the mayor of Boston. It's 1,500 to be on the ballot as an at-large city council candidate, and the numbers go down from there. I guess the reason why we're discussing this is because the pandemic is ongoing. As the SJC found last year, showing up at people's doorsteps, exchanging clipboards, the ordinary thing that you do to collect signatures at scale, all those are more difficult to do now, and quite possibly they're less safe. So we're hoping to find some relief for that. The council unanimously passed Councillor Edwards' resolution last week, which is really exciting. Today, there was an open letter that was addressed to state policymakers that was signed by nearly all of the current candidates for mayor of Boston, and also nearly all of the candidates for city council. So there's clearly a lot of energy there. We'd love to use that momentum to actually make some changes. I think as most people on the call know, a legislative change would have to come from the state because of the way the statutes and the city charter interacts. It would be possible for an administrative change to solve the problem of electronic signatures. That happened at the state level last year as a result of the court ruling, and Secretary Galvin rolled out, as we know, a way of getting electronic signatures done. Now, I'd love to know that that's in the works. I haven't heard from the Secretary of State that is this year. The elections department has done incredible work in the past year, making sure that we had safe elections with high turnout. I'd be more than curious to know if there's anything that we could do this year. It does seem like it's something that needs to be done at the state level first, and that's why I think a lot of advocacy efforts have been addressed in that direction. So I'd love to take questions or help field sort of a creative discussion about how to do this. It's also possible for us to just have a conversation about how candidates and campaigns can collect signatures safely under the current rules as they exist today, of course, if we're not able to change those rules. So thanks, everyone. Thank you.
So again, just going back in order of arrival, I had two quick questions for the elections department. One really, from my understanding, the there's 2 ballot initiatives likely to be on this November. And I don't think this impacts this. This is the non-binding resolution from East Boston and the charter amendment regarding budgets. This week, I don't think it does this at all impact them and how they're printed and the timing for either one of those.
It may, depending on how long our ballot's going to be, it may impact the printing and the turnaround time for our ballots.
So the length of the ballot can determine how fast you can turn it around. So if we have, like, I don't know, 65 people running for at-large and 200 people running for mayor.
The questions, sorry, the questions have to appear on the November ballot only. So hopefully we would have narrowed the field down by that time. But it still depends on the language that's going to go onto the ballot.
Okay, all right then. So, but do you expect any major problems with just the ballot questions in this?
No, we don't.
Okay, that was my only concern. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to get clarity. So it's always, I'm of the opinion, and just based on experience here, that we need a home rule petition to change. And I'm getting some information that state law that was cited in the transmittal letter enables us to do it without a home rule petition. So I need to understand a little bit better in terms of we're changing the city charter. It's always been my understanding that requires a home rule petition. And if that's the case, this should be being done in a home rule petition. If that's not the case, then I need to be convinced that for some reason, the first time that we're changing the charter does not require a home rule petition. That's number one. And then second question would be, what would happen if we didn't move the date? What impact would that have on the election department? And lastly, what is the long-term plan, I guess, to factor in the expansion of early voting? We've always had election dates. We've had preliminary and generals. We've had primaries. Preliminaries and finals, and we've had primaries and generals. And obviously early voting has come along. We should be able to work within the parameters of those dates that have set forth by the city charter and or state law. So I guess we're going to start thinking long term if other elections are impacted.
Councillor Flaherty, could you refer to the section of the city charter that is being changed? I understood it was a minimum of 6 weeks in the city charter, that it was a requirement of a minimum. But if you could just cite, 1 second, Councillor Bach. If you
I don't have it in front of me, but I just know that as far as my recollection, the city charter requires the preliminary election occur on the 6th Tuesday preceding the election, the final election. So 6 weeks preceding that is how it's always been.
Thank you.
I've been on a lot of those ballots since 1999. So
we know, Councillor Flaherty. We know.
Well, that's it. So those are the 3 questions I have for the commissioner in a nutshell. If we can get some clarity on whether this needs to be a home rule petition or not, and what if we don't change this? What happens to the election department? I mean, they'd have to say if we don't change it, you're going to have to figure it out, I assume, right? And you're going to have to burn the candles at all ends to make it happen. And then thirdly, what's the plan moving forward with the expansion of early voting? Is now every single election via primary or general or preliminary and final? Are we going to have to every election we have to figure out whether the election department can get their house in order and meet the deadlines because of the early voting?
So I'll start by saying that I think the provisions of section 103P allows us to change the date without requiring a home rule petition. It states the provisions of this section shall apply to any regular annual or biennial city or town elections, notwithstanding any general special law to the contrary. This was done in 2015 when we had to change the date of the election, set the date of the preliminary election back 2 weeks due to conflicting schedule with the Jewish holidays. And it was just the election dates that was changed. And it was done by the same manner, which is how we modeled this request as well. Should this not change, Again, we will make elections work as we always do under the current laws. It just will provide for a very short turnaround time for us to mail the ballots to the voters. So by the time we put the ballots in the mail for the voters, for them to get it back to us, they only have 3 weeks to get it back to us. Should the law be expanded to allow for early voting, in-person early voting, and that's something that we would like to move forward with as well, it's going to give us a very limited time frame to have the ballots available during the early voting period as well.
Does that answer your questions, Councilor Flaherty? Okay, Councilor Bach?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. What I was going to comment on before was just Councilor Flaherty specifically. So it's Chapter 54, 103P. I had this exact same question that you had. And what it turns out is basically that provision of the Mass General laws basically overrides all municipalities, any specifics they have in their charter. It says, despite the fact that it might say the 6th, like Tuesday before, and it is specific, you're totally right. It doesn't say a minimum. It says like it's the 6th Tuesday before. It says we can still by order, we can change the date. And that was what I meant when I said earlier, like we don't have the ability to change anything else about how signatures work, about how like the ballots are printed, like any of those details. It doesn't give us carte blanche to just change election related things that are in the charter. It just specifically says that we can change the date. And it seems like it was designed for basically the kind of flexibility around the things like the Jewish holidays and other stuff, like to just let us do it without a home rule. So I had looked that up when I was concerned about the same thing last week.
Answer Council Bach through the chair. And then what? And then after the election, it reverts right back to the 6th Tuesday before, that automatically reverts back.
Right, because the charter holds, we're not amending the charter. We're simply using our right we're using our right by order to set the date at something different from the charter. So we wouldn't be permanently changing what the charter date sets for the election. And I think that if we did do it, Madam Chair, and Anita, I think we would be well advised just to add a line in the order if we did do it that said that all other dates published by the Elections Commission remain the same, because enough of them key off of the prelim election date that I don't think we'd want to create confusion about that, since we're already in the midst of so many of those dates. So that's just a little, I think we'd be fine. Like there's no problem with doing that, but it just for the purposes of clarity, I think it would be good to do that. And then my question really, I guess in it, like, so I said already, right? My concern is that I think people lock in to paying attention to their local elections after Labor Day in this town. That has been my experience. So I'm worried about us losing another week. So I guess my question is like, have you guys explored like all avenues in terms of like, is there anything we can do to get the printer to like expedite things? Like, is there anything, I mean, I was thinking about, hopefully the ballot questions won't drive us to like extra sheets of paper, but there's a world in which you could print out a bunch of those and then just be waiting for the first page. I'm just curious whether you guys have thought at all about, if we don't move it, ways to kind of make all those turnaround pieces as efficient as possible.
There really is not, because of the certification process, which is governed by mass law. We cannot certify the election results before a certain time frame, and because we have to allow, we can't certify it prior to the time for a recount has expired. So we can't certify the elections until 6 days after the preliminary election, and then the charter requires that we hold a ballot position drawing following that. So after the ballot position drawing is when we can actually submit the names to our printer for creation of our ballots. So we really can't expedite anything.
And what's our typical, like, so obviously if we move it back a week, we're giving you one more week. So it's like, so when have we usually had ballots available for people? Like if someone's going to do, say in our old world, so you needed an excuse, but you're voting absentee, come into elections, get a ballot. What's been typically the time frame at which those have been available to people?
It's typically 3 weeks. However, we have never had vote by mail. So with vote by mail comes a larger volume of absentee or mail-in ballots. And that's what we're trying to prepare for. Even with absentee voting, we haven't seen the volume. This would be the very first time that we've had vote by mail, or should it be expanded, it would be the first time we've had vote by mail for a municipal election. So we do want to make sure that we have as much time as possible so that we can execute this effectively and make sure that every voter has the opportunity to vote within a reasonable time frame.
Mhm. And what about this past year when we had vote by mail in the presidential? How far ahead did we get the ballots out to
We
people?
had 6 weeks.
And obviously with that, because the primaries are back in the spring, we didn't have this tightness. So we sent the.
The
And-
primary was September 1st, I believe, and the election was November 1st as well. Was it November 3rd? November 3rd.
Right. Okay. And did you do you know, does the statute, I know that it only runs through June 30th right now, but the state statute that expands vote by mail, does that have any timelines in it that have to be harmonized with ours in terms of when things are available and all that jazz?
I believe there is a certain time frame that we have to get the ballots out to the voters. And I think they have to be back here by November 2nd, which is the election day at 8 p.m. in order to be counted.
Okay, and do you know you don't know off the top of your head what that time frame is that we have to get them out to the voters by?
We're looking at that.
Looking it up.
So
So
I think it's as early as the ballots become available, if I'm not mistaken. It's as early as we get the ballots, because I know that they changed that from the absentee. That was something that they changed. So it's as early as we have the ballots available.
got it. But is it fair to summarize if the state were not to extend mail-in voting, then we'll probably have a schedule that we can live with based on what our normal procedures have been. But the issue is that if they did, which is a thing that I think basically everyone on this council, I think is committed in favor of. I think mayors past and present are committed in favor of, right? Like we're all in favor of voter access. So the concern is that is what creates this thing, which, as Councilor Arroyo said, hasn't technically happened yet, is what creates our concern.
That's correct. And as we know, the legislature doesn't usually move very fast. So we don't want to find ourselves in the position where vote by mail is expanded and then we're scrambling to get something moved. And it's probably not a good idea to change the date of the preliminary at the last minute either, which is why we're here trying to be proactive in getting the date of the preliminary changed. And the only set date for vote by mail is the date in which we have to mail. The last day when we can mail a ballot, it's 4 days before 4 business days before the election is the last day we can actually mail a ballot to the voters. So the voters are going to get a very small window of opportunity to have a ballot mailed to them. This would just give us that extra week to ensure that any voter that wants to cast a ballot by mail and has the opportunity to do so. And as we saw in the during the March primary and even September, that vote by mail also included increased participation. So I think that this would be a great administratively for us to make sure that every single voter that wants to vote by mail has the most opportunity or the greatest opportunity to do so.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Campbell?
No questions for me, Councilor Edwards. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you also to Patrick as well for the advocacy.
Thank you. Councilor Arroyo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just ask, because I haven't heard it yet, we keep talking about moving the primary up. I think it's because moving the date of the primary is more common. The primary date's been moved multiple times in the sense that it changes its date every election cycle. Sometimes it's after Labor Day, sometimes it's further back in September. And so people don't have a set date that they decide, like that's the primary date. It changes. The second Tuesday in November is more of a traditional thing. Why wouldn't we, to preserve sort of the maximum amount of time for people to actually, engage with this ballot, just move the general elections final back a week? Why wouldn't we do that instead of moving the primary up a week?
Anela?
It has to change by an act of the legislature.
Thank you.
That answers that. And so without having to move the general back, the primary is the only date technically that we can move without having to do a home rule petition. That's it?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. And then in terms of the election department itself, in terms of its advocacy with the state on mail-in voting, where are we right now as far as that goes? In terms of them doing that, are they still looking at, like, I know they extended mail-in voting to like June. Is that accurate?
That's correct. June 31st, June 30th. Yeah.
Okay.
June 30th. And again, I haven't heard much, but this is again in preparation or anticipation of any further expansion of vote by mail.
Okay. I think you've answered most of my questions. It's reassuring to me that there's something we can do without having to have a home rule petition in general. So that's good to know. So thank you on that front. And then in terms of the election department itself, on the turnaround of mail-in ballots, how quickly post an actual primary election result, if we had, say, a recount situation, how would that impact mail-in balloting in general?
That would significantly impact it because we could not certify the election results until after the recount has taken place. So we couldn't print anything. We couldn't hold the ballot position drawing, and we couldn't print until after the recount has taken place.
Okay, and is there anything we could do? It's April. Is there anything we could do sort of to try and prevent, and obviously we can't prevent a recount, but is there something we could do to prevent that situation from happening where there's a possibility of a recount and there's a plan B?
There is not.
All right, well then hopefully we don't have a recount. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll keep my fingers crossed as well.
You and me both.
I would just like to add that should mail-in voting be expanded to include the fall elections, although it's not going to be required of us to mail applications to all registered voters, it is the goal of this department to do so. So we want to make sure that we're consistent with the practices from the fall, and we will be mailing every single registered voter an application that also brings awareness to the election.
That's great. I'm really happy about that. So I'm sorry, my colleagues are less excited. I just want to say thank you. That is incredible. Getting out there, making sure that you said ballots to everyone, right? Or
applications, because
applications, at least applications. So a lot of people are going to be able to, it's another click, go ahead and apply, make sure you know to vote. This is great. So again, kudos to the elections department. Sorry, I'm out of order. Are you all set, Councillor Arroyo?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you to Commissioner Tavares as well. I just had a couple of questions and comments, maybe. Wanted to follow up on Councilor Arroyo's questioning. If there are recounts for, number 2 and 3, maybe for mayor or for a district councilor or for at large, I know we don't have plans yet for a recount, but would part of that process, if there was a recount, would part of that process be that the November election might be moved back a week or so, or 2 weeks, because we don't know how long a recount can take? I'm just trying to think of what the logistics might be and the challenges in preparation in case that issue did arise.
The recount would have to take place within 6 days. And we have had experience with recounts here, fortunately. So I think that we can conduct the recount in an expedited manner. I think we all know how our at-large city council recount went, and that took us 3 days to recount the entire city. So I think that we can do it in a pretty expedited manner.
Okay, but would the potential candidates, would the candidates seeking a recount, would they need to formally get signatures verified?
They would have to file for a recount by petition.
Yeah, so that might add more time to it. Maybe the time is already built into it. But I would like to see just an automatic recount where you don't need signatures from residents again. It's just too time consuming, and the candidates are exhausted, and they have to put money into a recount and paying lawyers and attorneys fees. No offense to my friend Patrick here, but we don't need more attorneys involved in recounts.
Unfortunately, at the moment, as it stands, that would require legislative changes as well.
Okay. Also, my final question is, when you do mail out the ballot, is your office comfortable with the language-related issues of translation that would need to take place? And do you have a good plan already in process to translate that?
Absolutely, we do. Yes.
Okay, can you briefly tell me what that plan is?
Well, we have translators here, and that's another thing that goes into the ballot. So all of our ballots have to be proofread, and we have internal translation services here. And then the ballots are proofread in both English and the language it's translated in before we can actually give the printer the go-ahead to print the ballots.
Okay. So you send out the actual ballot, but do you also send out, prior to that, do you send out a application for the ballot?
That's correct. We will send out the application for the ballot translated in multiple languages.
Oh, okay. All right, that's important. I just want to make sure my constituents that speak and read Chinese and Spanish also have the same opportunity as others. So I appreciate the hard work, the professionalism, the dedication of the election department. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Counselor Mejia.
I must be the elephant in the Zoom, because every time we hear recounts, it is the triggering word in terms of just having been through that process. I know that the elections department is well positioned and able to handle it. They did such an amazing job getting through it in 3 days, and it was a citywide race. So I think that prepared you for everything and anything, because these days anything is possible. So, and knowing how every single vote matters, I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I just have a few questions. I know that Patrick introduced this whole push to reduce the number of signatures, and I'm wondering if something like that will have any impact in this particular conversation that we're having now, and if so, I spoke briefly with Sabino. I'm not sure if there is something that we need to be mindful of. I know collecting 1,500 signatures, you need to at least do double, just so that making sure that you at least have 1,500 that are certified. And so that just in the time of COVID, I'm just curious, what if any advocacy we can, how our advocacy will impact the date change and all that. I don't want to lose sight of the importance of being able to reduce the number of signatures that we have to collect. Obviously, I know we're going to be picking up our papers on April the 27th. So that is usually that's a quick turnaround. So if any decisions that need to be made would need to be made today or this week or sometime soon. So that way we can provide clear guidance to those who are picking up their ballots and their papers, all that. Can you talk a little bit about how that impacts this conversation?
Any changes to signature gathering will not impact us at all. I think we just need to be mindful of the time frame here, because candidates only have 3 weeks to gather signatures. And next week will be the opening day when candidates can come into our office and actually pick up the nomination papers, and that's when the clock is going to start ticking.
So then I guess, and Sabino's not here, but he did mention that that may potentially impact this particular hearing. So maybe that it was something else then. So that's all good. I'm just curious, how are we communicating with constituents about the proposed changes and the reasons for making these changes? What I'm really specifically concerned about are the people who are either first-time voters or who voted for the first time in the last municipal election, and how they might be a little bit confused by these changes. So I'm just really curious about your communication rollout plan. And always, I always want to know your multiple languages and what that capacity looks like. And just curious about which organizations, if any, you're partnering up with to help get the word out.
So we will put out a press release should the date change. We'll put out a press release. We'll continue to push this out through all of our communication channels. We are hoping that, should vote by mail be expanded, our ability to mail every single registered voter an application for a ballot is going to be huge, because again, that will bring awareness to the fact that there is an election. The election dates will be on there, and they'll have to actually select the ballots, the elections that they want to participate in. So I believe that that's going to be a huge piece to making voters aware that there is actually a preliminary election and the date of the preliminary election. I think that's something that we have always kind of toyed around with, the idea of how do we bring awareness to voters that there is in fact a municipal election, because as we know, that's where we see the lowest turnout. So I think that this is going to be key to bringing awareness to voters.
And not to hijack this hearing and continue to talk about the number of signatures that we have to collect, I'm just curious what, if any, reactions you might be able to provide us in terms of the feasibility of being able to do that in your capacity.
It would just require a special act of court for the signatures to be reduced, and we are here to support whatever changes take place.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioner and team. Always great to see my friend and constituent Patrick Roth from JP on this Zoom as well. This is, I'm uniquely, I think, qualified, at least on this panel, to speak on this issue, because the first time in a decade, I will have the most important role in a municipal election, and that's not candidate, but that's as a voter. So, Commissioner, I support any efforts that we can employ to make sure that as many people are able to vote safely and efficiently. And if that means moving the date of the preliminary election, then I absolutely support it. And I think that you've articulated why it has to happen to really implement voting by mail opportunities, which again, to echo the chair, my great appreciation for you and the leadership that you've demonstrated, not unlike a very similar conversation we had a year ago on this very topic on election safety, where we discussed mailing every active and inactive voter in the city of Boston at least a absentee ballot application. So I think that we've seen a success of actually increased turnout for a primary election in 2020. And then certainly the general election, of course, had very high turnout, as is often the case in a presidential election. But to be able to, again, do that in a municipal election, the preliminary election for that makes a lot of sense. So anything we can do to implement early voting, anything we can do to implement vote by mail, anything we can do to simply address and tear down any barriers that any individual may have to voting, we should be doing. And I'm happy to add my voice to the chorus and certainly add my vote when this comes before the body. Again, not being a candidate, and it's too late clearly to do it for this municipal election year, but I think going forward, the city would really, and not only for city elections, but for state elections as well, we ought to be having a conversation about moving a primary election or a preliminary election to the spring. This is what many, many other states do. It would allow for that very issue that we often come across, where an election right after Labor Day or often conflicting with a Jewish holiday makes September a difficult month to have a primary or preliminary election. This is a way that we could both address it. It would move the election calendar up, but again, I think that the turnout could be and should be and would be increased voter participation, which is what we all want. So this is my long-winded opening statement that shall not end with a question other than to say I will be working during our budget process, which has begun in earnest under the capable leadership of Chair Bach, to make sure that the Boston Elections Department has as much resources, as many resources and as much funding as you need to be able to do the job well. You were thrown into such a difficult double whammy last year about pandemic as well as opportunities for voters, and you and your team just really served exemplary. I'm proud of you, and we know that will continue. So I look forward to being part of a record-setting voting turnout in Boston for this year. And again, anything we can do to increase that and make it easier for folks to vote, including moving the date of the preliminary election, makes a lot of sense because of the clear ramifications that will help us to be able to run a better municipal election in November. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor.
You're on mute, Madam Chair.
I'm glad you were paying attention. Sorry, my apologies. So we can go back through for any other additional questions on specifically either moving the date up a week or specifically discussion around the safe signature collection. I know some candidates are looking at mailing ballots out to folks, or excuse me, signature papers out to folks. But I also know that the elections department kind of gives us a finite amount of them, you know, to get signatures. So there's some practical things that might be worth bringing up. If any of my colleagues have suggestions about their ways in which they're collecting signatures. Traditionally, we'd all be at least in East Boston at the Shaw's.
Councilor, I would just like to add, since you just mentioned that some candidates may be mailing signature sheets, that our charter requires that there's a circulator and that the forms are actually signed by a circulator. So there's a lot of pieces to the charter that would have to change here for the signature gathering. So every single nomination paper has to be signed by the candidate and every single one has to be signed by a circulator.
Right. So maybe I was misunderstood. If I took out the paper, I will put myself out there as an example only, not that I am doing or planning to do things. I take this, I sign it, my volunteer signs it, and we then hear from Jane Doe at 1234 Apple Street. And she says, I'd like to sign your signature papers. We send it to her, she signs it and sends it back to us. That is not allowed. It's a question.
Well, I can't answer that question. As long as all of the signatures that are required on the nomination paper is there, we will accept the nomination paper.
Okay.
If that circulator piece, the circulator is the person actually going out and gathering the signature. That person should be signing the nomination paper as well. So when that nomination comes to us, we will be looking for that signature.
Okay. I see Patrick
can challenge that petition.
I see Patrick raised his hand, and then Councilor Bach raised her hand, and then after, I'm gonna go to my appointment. So if you want to be brief in your comments, and then I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Flaherty, and I'll send you the list, Councilor Flaherty, of order of arrival. Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief, and I don't want to in any way purport to speak for the elections department, but I always understood the position on that point of the elections department in Boston and other city and town clerks around the state, that it was not possible to tell from a filed signature paper that had been properly signed, whether that had been distributed through the mail or in person through a circulator. That's just not something that the department can easily verify by looking at the paper that's before them. It may be subject to a challenge process by another candidate if a third-party candidate came in and made an allegation about the manner in which that signature was collected. That's not legal advice and not official advice, but as an advocate, that was my understanding, and I just offering that.
And I will say that for us, if it looks right, we will, and we have to accept it.
Thank you. Councilor Bach?
Yeah, I actually wanted to follow up on something you said, Counselor Edwards. Anita, the sort of the limitation on the number of sheets that the election department gives to candidates, I don't think that's in the charter. And it does strike me as something that could administratively be improved in this year, given the constraints of just the fact that I would expect people to be, instead of filling up whole sheets, I would expect we have a lot more 2s and 3s and 5s this year. So I'm wondering if you guys have made any allowance for that or thought about that issue.
I believe the number of signature, the number of papers per race is spelled out in the charter as well.
Is it really? I missed that. Do you know which section?
Number of pieces of paper, number of
The
how
paper,
cheap were we? Like, seriously.
I think that at some point with the expansion, hopefully vote by mail is permanently expanded to include all elections, that there are a lot of pieces to the city charter that does need to be looked at. I know that in the past we have tried to submit legislation to at least reduce some pieces like the circulator, because I think that's something that only exists here in the city of Boston. The circulator and requiring that the first person who signs a nomination paper, or requiring a voter to sign just one paper,
right,
and things of that nature. I know that we've tried to change in the past. So I think this is something that the work needs to continue to make sure that we follow through and we do have enough time frame to properly execute an election with vote by mail in place, and to remove some of these unnecessary hurdles for the nomination process. But again, that's not something that can come from us. We're just the administrators and not the policy makers. So that's just things that we've noticed in doing the work that we do here.
So, I agree. And I want to say, I think it's worth saying, there is a distinction between, like, there's clearly a bunch of ways that we should improve our election process. It isn't really good governance to change processes in the middle of them. So I do think we have to all keep in mind a distinction between the things that, like, we should be introducing omnibus home rule petitions about, like, come say December of this year, right? When you're sort of safely out of the run of an actual race, as opposed to, like, when you have a process, even if we don't think it's the ideal process, there's a presumption against tinkering with it in the middle. And I think that's a good presumption. So I do think, like, we should be limiting the changes that we make in the middle of the process to, like, things that are truly necessary because of the circumstances we find ourselves in. And I think, Anita, I take the point about this, the uncertainty about the mail-in ballots, and that creates a situation. On this nomination papers, I found it, you're right, it's in the charter. But am I right in understanding, I mean, officially the election department doesn't encourage people to make photocopies of those sheets, but in practice, there's, if all the signatures are valid and seem to have been made on the piece of paper and whatever, the elections department also, as I understand, doesn't distinguish between paper issued by it and paper that may have been issued by another printer. Is that a fair?
That's correct. If it looks right to us, if everything looks good, we will accept it, and we have to accept it. It just could be subject to challenge, but I didn't know who's going to be.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way that we could administratively, because when I read the charter on that, it actually says, it just says not more than 20 nomination sheets shall be issued. I'm sure this was somebody trying to save money back in the day. Like, it's like a kind of like efficiency, like whatever. But I just wonder if there's a way for us to administratively, like, say, like, yeah, like, we're only going to give you 20, but, like, if you make more, it's fine. I don't know if that's, because it seems like within the language of the charter, there might be an ability to make that kind of administrative judgment.
I don't think that, because it's spelled out in the charter, I don't think that we are going to say that. But again, if someone makes copies of nomination papers and they bring it here and we can't tell, we're not copy experts, and we can't tell that they're copies and the signatures look good and everything looks good on the nomination papers, then we have to accept it.
Right. Okay.
Going to be counting the number of sheets that someone returns in comparison to what was distributed.
Yeah. And then I guess a comment just for Patrick. I guess I'm a little bit hesitant about, so one thing I think just because we're on the rec, because we're being filmed and everything, I do think it's important to say that the CDC's come out with guidance in the last week or so saying you're extremely unlikely to spread COVID through surfaces, a thing that we were very concerned about at the start of the pandemic. So I do think that in terms of like the clipboard pen thing, et cetera, that we were all very worried about, we have to recognize that the health guidance on that has shifted somewhat. And I don't want us to unduly sort of indicate a fear where it may not be the most updated guidance to do that. I guess my concern about electronic signatures, again, it's a little bit the kind of like in midstream piece. Like it seems to me like if we, I mean, I don't think we're very likely to get the state to give us an electronic signatures mechanism in the next couple of weeks, frankly. But if they did, I feel like then it would set up a need for our elections department to have an electronic signature verifying process, which again, like it doesn't currently exist because we don't have that thing. So I'm just a little bit worried about, it seems to me like there might be other ways to try to facilitate this process, but like that might just be a hard one to switch to at this hour. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. Both points are well taken. I certainly agree with you that what we've learned more about the virus has mitigated some of those initial concerns about surface contact. On the election, on the electronic signature piece, I certainly agree with the general point that making big election changes midstream should be sort of frowned upon in general terms. Having said that, I suppose we did have electronic signatures in the election last year, the statewide election. It was court ordered and there was friction in rolling it out for sure. But the state has had some experience doing that. The Secretary's office has had some experience administering and introducing that. So it wouldn't be a total blank slate. And there's also other states that have done it, right? So it's something that's been done. And, in other modern facets of life, we've been able to reasonably integrate electronic signature options and have that be, verified by identity. But your point that it's, April, we don't have much time on the clock until this thing starts is totally well taken. It's out there because I think we acknowledge some of the challenges that would come with a legislative solution and a home rule petition, which have been sort of in the air here. And so that is one technically that would be administrative and not legislative.
Right. Although only arguably because our charter, which is so unbelievably specific, says that the signatures have to be in person.
So
right.
there's an argument. The SJC last year in its court decision looked at that language in the state statute and nevertheless ordered electronic signatures and did not say that it was doing something that was inconsistent with the law. I think there is an argument that electronic signatures in-person signatures can be provided electronically. It's not to say that it's fully square, right? There's definitely arguments there.
And how far ahead with last year's cycle was the decision to switch to electronic signatures as compared to the deadline for requiring signatures?
It was some weeks in advance of the deadline. There was time. And there was actually a little bit of a court-ordered administrative process where the Secretary was ordered to file a report with the SJC about implementing that process. So there was, I can't recall exactly, but it wasn't on the order of months. It was more than a few days. It was on the order of weeks.
Mm-hmm. But order of weeks of the deadline or of the starting of the process? Because in my head, it was like earlier spring of last year.
It was my recollection was weeks within the deadline. I believe that papers could be pulled by candidates in February, and the court order came out in early April, and then nomination papers were due in May or late April. We'd have to go back and that's my recollection.
Yeah, I just think it's tight, but I hear you. Okay, well, thank you so much, and thank you. I know we've switched in the meantime to Mr. Chairman, so thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councilor Bark. And I guess the dilemma, I guess, on the signature piece to Kenzie, obviously, and to anyone here is that we obviously will either be there ourselves as the candidate, or we'll have a campaign representative that will be presenting a nomination paper on a clipboard in most instances with a pen. And I guess how that whole thing is going to go down, I guess, is a mystery. Obviously, you want to make sure the presenter is exercising social distancing is masked. They may want to use their own pen. You might have to give that pen away so that it's not reused. I mean, those are sort of, I guess those are the conundrums, if you will, that either the folks that are collecting signatures on candidates' behalfs or the folks that are being asked to sign. That's that sort of dilemma. Do I grab the pen? Do I use my own pen? Do I just take a pass on it? So I guess that remains to be seen as to how that's going to roll out in the next week or so once papers come out. But and whether or not, to Patrick's point, sort of on the e-signature piece, whether that's going to be more. I mean, for example, at large, you have to get 1,500 signatures, and to some degree, that's a little bit of it's a lift, it's a task. And that if you're competing and you're able to do that, great. If you're struggling to do that, or if folks are hesitant to sign the papers because of how they're presented and or because they didn't have their own pen with them. So I guess we'll probably, as the papers sort of roll out and as we start the nomination paper drive, and that's not just us, but it's all candidates for public office, for both council and mayoral in this election cycle. I think we're going to get immediate feedback probably in the first 24 to 48 hours as to whether or not people are willingly participating in the process and are willingly signing nomination papers, or if there's a resistance, then is it sort of more of a COVID resistance? So I guess that's the dilemma I think that all campaigns will be dealing with moving forward. So that's just my sort of 2 cents on my experience on nomination signature drives. Any feedback on that is welcome from the commissioner and or Attorney Roth.
I will say for in-person voting, a lot of our items that we used were shared. We just had to encourage all of our election workers to frequently sanitize everything. All of our pens were returned, sanitized, and redistributed. And I think that's just something that will have to come from some training will have to be put in place for any of the circulators. They're going to be out there gathering signatures in terms of how to disinfect and sanitize clipboards in between voters. And I'll say that all over the country, we saw some of our highest turnouts during these past elections. So my hope would be that people are still willing and to participate in the democratic process in signing these nomination papers.
And I'll just add, I think I certainly agree with Commissioner, same hope. The experience of last year gathering signatures, I think suggests that it's just an increased burden, right? It's more of an expense for campaigns to pay for postage. People hesitate before they take that pen, whether or not, to Councilor Bach's point, whether or not that's consistent with the latest science or not. There's just an extra burden on here that was not likely intended by the rules as they exist today. And just to circle back to one earlier point that Councilor Mejia raised earlier, in the resolution that passed the council last week, one option could be to give campaigns more time to collect signatures. That happened last year, and that's something that the council we could call on the state to do. Right? There's all sorts of moving pieces there, but that proposal was actually not in the resolution last year. It's not something that's been under discussion for the reasons that the commissioner raised. That just we have a crunch, there's a crunch, and that only eats more and more into the time that the department needs to prepare its ballots and to do its work with the signatures. So that hasn't been on the table yet. Of course, it could be.
Thank you, Patrick. Now I see Councilor Mejia has her hand raised on this issue. Councilor Mejia, or another question?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Flaherty. So I kind of want to go back again to, I think about this as Councilor Flaherty mentioned, how difficult it is just to, from a standpoint of just being a campaign, especially when you have very limited resources. And if we think about this through the lens that we always talking about equity, there are a lot of candidates who are running who have very limited resources. And if we think about this from that perspective, if we're really intentional about making sure that folks who want to run have the ability to do so and to get on the ballot, then we definitely need to really consider what exceptions we're going to make. We're under a global pandemic. If we thought it was hard just to get on the ballot under normal, quote unquote, circumstances, you could just only imagine how fearful, even though folks are getting vaccinated, the spread is still a threat for so many. And so I just think that there are going to be less people who are in front of Roach Brothers. There's going to be all of those things that we usually rely on. You know, even businesses are operating 25, 30% reduced capacity. So it's just the foot traffic is just not there. And so I'm just really pushing for us to really think outside the box in terms of how we're going to remove these barriers for folks, if because we won't have a democracy if we can't, you know, really get people on the ballot, right? And so I'm just curious about what are we thinking about to help address that issue. And then, you know, I know that for us at large, it's 22 neighborhoods, 1,500 signatures. It's just a big undertaking. And if we do, God forbid, have to do a recount, look, collecting I don't know, I think it was 50 signatures for 22 wards. That was just ridiculous. And we're gonna have to think ahead just in case we do end up in a situation like that again. Like this whole idea of collecting signatures, period, whether we are under a global pandemic or not, we need to definitely revisit the charter and change to meet the needs of the 21st century. And I'm curious if this is the moment for us to seize. And I think there was a discussion about even how many signatures are on a ballot. Is it 20 or 25 or 30? I forget. That you could, how many signatures per sheet?
30 something, right? 32, 33.
33. Yeah, the paper can't be any longer. But so I'm just curious if there's any way, what can we do? How can we support? And what will it take for us to be able to push this harder? I know we're already going as hard as we can, but I want to go as hard. What else can we do, Patrick? What else can we do? How can we make this happen?
Well, I'll start, and then maybe if the commissioner wants to jump in, please. I'll certainly appreciate your enthusiasm, Counselor. I share it. I'll say that this is not this hearing last week. Today's letter is not the first time we've tried to raise these issues. You know, we've obviously there was litigation last year, but there was also correspondence with state leaders and some legislative advocacy. We've been trying to elevate this issue, and it has not been successful to date. And so we're continuing to push for it. I think that it's an important thing, and I'll say it can be difficult to organize people around because it's, it affects, in theory, it really affects a limited group of people, which is those running for office. But I think you need to make that connection for people, as you just did, right? That this is about our democracy, and who ends up on the ballot really dictates how our government operates. And it's so important that we have rules that allow for people to not only appear on the ballot, but also allows voters to see the candidates that they want on that ballot, right? And look, there's good reasons why we have rules that have some basic threshold requirements for putting people on the ballot. If you read Larry DeCara's book, you hear about old tales of people putting lots of extra people on a ballot to make it harder for some to win. That's a different problem. But I just think that the state, the city, we've not struck this balance right now.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, to that point, just really quick, Councilor Flaherty, if I could just say something.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I want to underscore this whole idea of representation. And I think that even if we follow that thread a little bit more, and even if it's the right thing to do in this moment in time, right, is making sure that people feel like those that they want to see have a chance, get on the ballot. And if for those folks who have limited resources, are going to be harder to get for them to get on the ballot, then I think even if it's just, look, I see this as a civil rights issue too. I'm the chair of civil rights, and if we're not doing our due diligence to removing these barriers, then we are literally preventing people from participating in democracy. And even just standing on that is worth, Commissioner Tavares, even if it's just on that standalone, is something for us to consider.
Very good. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. If Kerry or Christine are listening, so is this the opportunity for a public testimony? Has anyone signed up to offer public testimony?
Hi, Counselor. I haven't received any requests for public testimony.
All right, and then from your vantage point or from Kerry's vantage point, is there anyone in the waiting room that needs to be let in to offer public testimony?
No, there is not.
Very good. So those that are listening and or will be watching a broadcast, they have the ability to submit written testimony to the Committee on Government Operations, as well as contact any of their district or at-large councilors if they wish to offer an opinion on whether or not we should move the date of the preliminary election. It's currently scheduled for September 21st forward to September 14th, but keeping the final election on the same date. So that said, if there's any final thoughts from our panelists, Commissioner Tavares and or Attorney Patrick Roth, feel free to just offer some final comments before we wrap up.
I would just say that some of these efforts or some of these issues are similar issues faced by other communities, and it just may be worth coordinating, if you guys haven't done so already, with other municipalities for support in some of these legislative changes.
Yeah, and I'll just at that, I certainly agree with that sentiment. And I'd just like to thank the council for inviting me and giving me a little time to speak on this.
Well, thank you both, Commissioner and Attorney Roth, for your participation in today's hearing, and obviously to my colleagues as well participating. And we'll obviously have an opportunity to speak to the chair with respect to a committee report, and then get this matter before the council for a vote up or down as quickly as possible. So with that, unless my colleagues have any parting comments, we'll be closing out the Committee on Government Operations as it pertains to Docket 0452, which is a message in order to change the date of the preliminary election from this municipal year from September 21st, 2021 to September 14th, 2020. And that was that matter was sponsored by former Mayor Martin Walsh and referred to the committee back on March 24th of 2021. So without objection and moving forward to recess this hearing, the council will be in recess, and we'll get back as soon as we can to the commissioner with the results of the committee report and the vote from the council. Very good. Good to see everybody, and have a great rest of your afternoon. And the Committee on Government Operations with respect to Docket 0452 is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leave right there.